Welcome everyone to this very important conversation between me and the provost of UCL, discussing UCL's Stonewall decision on not rejoining the Stonewall scheme. So I would like to introduce myself a little. My name is Angel. I am your LGBTQ officer for this academic year, and I am a second year zoology student. So thank you for the provost for joining us today, and he's going to introduce himself a little bit just to the rest of us.
Sure, look, thanks very much. So I'm Michael Spence. I'm the President and Provost of UCL, and I've been here for a year. I arrived just before the second lockdown, and so I've had an unusual experience of arrival at UCL, but I've just been incredibly impressed by all that I have found here, and in particular by the energy and commitment of our student politicians and student representatives.
Yeah, so if you guys didn't know, last week, me and the LGBT network committee, we met with the provost to discuss some important issues that we think need to be raised about improving trans students and staff's life on campus. So we're going to run through quickly some of the points that we made. And the provost himself made a number of commitments, and I think it will help if we talked about those a little with the rest of the students. So do you remember what we said in that meeting?
Yeah, of course I do. Look, it was an incredibly constructive meeting, and I think the LGBTQ network made a very clear the concerns of students and staff, but particularly of students, about the university's decision not to rejoin Stonewall. And I think in particular made arguments about whether or not those that decision had been made on the basis of facts that were misunderstood or ignored. And I encouraged the network to write to the academic board if they saw fit to make the points that they were making to me in the meeting, and I know that they are going to do that. A big part of the meeting, though, also focused on what we can do practically at this point to make sure that we improve the lives of trans staff and students on campus, and make sure that UCL is genuinely a place where everybody can be fully themselves, and in particular where trans, non-binary and gender non-conforming staff can be fully themselves. And there are three things that the students asked me to address. The first was that we might have a small grants fund to support the particular financial needs of trans, non-binary and gender non-conforming staff and gender non-conforming students, and just as they do at the University of Oxford. And I was pleased to agree with that, and have talked to the USU about a fund that the USU might administer, and those conversations are ongoing, but we'll have some details about that relatively quickly, with the notion that the fund will be in place from the next academic year. They also talked, and this I found particularly distressing, about problems that students had with having their preferred name on their ID card. And of course, it is UCL policy that students are fully entitled to have their preferred name on their ID card, and to be referred to by their preferred name by those who teach them, and by their peers, and so on. So this wasn't a policy issue, it was a kind of ineptitude in the system issue. And so I've set up a task and finish group to look at what it is that actually causes the delay in issuing those cards. And I'll be able to update people about what's happening there next week. The other thing that wasn't a policy issue again, but seems to be a communications issue, is the group asked me to commit that all our new building projects will involve both single sex or gender toilets, gender neutral toilets, and of course also disabled toilets, but that we'll make sure that the bathroom arrangements are trans inclusionary. Well, that is a matter of policy. And in fact, in a whole slew of buildings that have where there's recently been building work, the students' end of the Wilkins building, the lower refectory, Poole Street West, Marshgate, the new Institute of Neurology on Gray's Inn Road, there will be that variety of toilets, and a map of different toilet facilities is online. But it was pretty clear from the meeting with the students that it wasn't known that that was UCL's policy, and also that there was some confusion about where those facilities were. So we have a comms job to do there to make sure that people have a better understanding of what the situation is.
Yeah, amazing. And I also know that you agreed to put out a statement addressing the fact that transphobia has become such a culture on campus, and address that the safety of trans students will be important at UCL.
Yeah, my understanding is that that ought to have gone out just this morning. I was really keen to do that, and glad that the network invited me to do that. I mean, in some senses, it goes without saying that transphobic behaviour is just unacceptable in all its forms at UCL. But it's also the case, and we know that it is the experience of our staff and students that in various ways they face exclusionary, marginalising and discriminating behaviour. And I personally am committed to making sure that we just eradicate that we keep the fight going to make sure that UCL is genuinely a place where everybody can be their whole self, and where nobody has to be frightened of marginalisation. And so I've issued a statement to that effect today, and it was a statement to which I was really pleased to be able to put my name, because it's something about which I feel very passionately.
Yep, cool. Thank you so much. And yeah, thank you for having a meeting with us last week. And I'm sure those things that we discussed would greatly help the life of trans students and staff on campus from now on. And okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about how today's session is going to run. Sure. So thank you guys who submitted questions to the Student Union website. We picked the most frequent ones and the most representative ones, and I'm going to be asking them on behalf of people who submitted to you, and you're going to answer. And while we cover those questions, that people can also submit questions of their own, and there should be a link in the chat to slido.com and using the passcode, and you can submit your own questions, and questions can be upvoted, etc. And then when we get to that point, we can see the most popular questions, and we're going to ask those again, if that sounds okay to everyone. Cool. So I'm going to start off with the first question from Gerard from the Student Union. Why has UCL withdrawn from a workplace equality scheme focused on making sure that LGBTQ+ staff, UCL staff, are not discriminated against and are free to flourish? And what does that have to do with academic freedom, except for now, lessened freedom from LGBTQ academics at this institute?
Right. So the university withdrew from the two Stonewall schemes, from the Workplace Equality Index, and also from the Stonewall Diversity Champions program during COVID as a resource issue. And the question was whether or not we were going to rejoin those schemes. A number of academic staff asked for a meeting of the academic board to discuss whether or not rejoining would have a negative impact on their academic work, and in particular a negative impact on academic freedom at the university. And I think their concern was essentially that Stonewall is in many ways a lobbying group as well as a kite mark scheme, and that it has particular positions around which it adopts what it calls a no debate position. And so, and that no debate position was in areas in which these members of staff did their academic work. And the concern was that the university joining a scheme that had a no debate position about issues that they did debate in their academic work would have a chilling effect on their academic freedom and on the freedom of the academic conversation at the university. That academic board is not only a place where they were entitled to bring that question, but it's also the place in our governance structure that was appropriate to address it. because the protection of academic freedom is core in the statutory responsibilities of the academic board. I was really concerned that this issue be discussed in a balanced way, given that it was an issue about which people obviously, in which people obviously had a lot at stake, both our LGBT staff and students, but particularly our trans, non-binary and gender non-conforming staff and students. And yet there were also these concerns being expressed by academic staff. And so I asked our Pro-Provost Equity, Diversity and Inclusion, Professor Sasha Roseneal, who also has an academic expertise in the sociology of gender, to write as neutral a paper as possible, putting, as we could see it, as fairly as possible, the argument on both sides. And then we also obviously permitted people to submit papers both for rejoining Stonewall and against rejoining Stonewall. The academic board is an advisory body. It advises council. But because it advises council, it effectively also advises the University Management Committee that has responsibility for the day-to-day running of UCL. At the same time, the question as to whether or not we should rejoin Stonewall went to the Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Committee of the University Management Subcommittee of the University Management Committee, which of course took soundings from and was advised by the various staff networks and steering groups and so on. And by a majority, they voted to rejoin Stonewall. So the University Management Committee was in a position where it had advice from academic board that there was a real question about academic freedom in rejoining Stonewall, and advice from the Equity, Diversity and Inclusion Subcommittee that rejoining Stonewall would be a good thing for our work in promoting LGBTQ+ rights, and in particular for promoting the interests of LGBTQ+ staff and students. I think on balance, and it was a difficult decision, and it was a difficult decision because one thing that was very clear was that there was deep commitment in the room to promoting the rights of and making sure that they are included in absolutely every sense. Deep commitment to our trans, non-binary and gender non-conforming staff and students. And but on balance, the University Management Committee decided that because Stonewall is effectively a kite marking scheme, and we could not rejoin but still continue with our work promoting the rights of trans staff and students, and indeed partly because we'd been interested in that area and working in that area, working in trans inclusion before Stonewall became interested in the issue. The UMC felt that we could not rejoin the scheme out of concern for the academic freedom arguments that had been advanced in academic board and that had been overwhelmingly endorsed in academic board, and yet nevertheless continue with and indeed force our program in the trans inclusion space. That decision was variously greeted in the university, and it is true to say that many of our staff and students found the decision really difficult, that it made them angry, and for them that it signalled a resiling on the part of the university from LGBT rights. The response to that in the university has been to say, well, we want an implementation in this group that does the boring but really important work of just going systematically through all our policies and all our practices and asking, are these trans inclusionary? so that students don't have an experience, for example, like having trouble getting their name card changed, or don't have an experience of finding it difficult to find a loo, or don't have or do have some financial support for their particular financial needs, all of those sorts of things. At the moment, the constitution of that implementation group is being consulted on, and it will be in place soon, but we are just keen to get on with the job. That was a very long answer to a straightforward question, but I thought it was important that people understand the whole background. And I'm sorry, Angel, for taking up rather more of your time than probably should have.
No, sorry. I think some people are saying that they can't see the Slido link in the chat. I think I'll just send it again. Hopefully it should work. Yep. 18645. Yeah. If you use the website and then you enter the code, it should allow you to ask questions and stuff. Okay, so moving on to the next question. Why did the limited underrepresented view of the academic board outweigh the lived experience and academic and professional expertise of many other groups at UCL, such as the EDI committee, the central EDI team, the LGBTQ+ equality steering group, the union, and Out at UCL, just to name a few?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, the academic board was commenting on the issue that is core to its responsibility, that is the academic freedom impacts of this particular decision. What the experts were telling us was, that there remains transphobia at UCL as there does in the rest of society. And I think in the end, on balance, the UMC decided that it could work to fight that transphobia and to protect trans rights without being a part of the Stonewall kite marking schemes, out of an acknowledgement of what it saw as the legitimate academic freedom concerns of the academic board. Now that I think it's really important to remember that our policies and procedures in relation to trans inclusion are just the same now as they were before the Stonewall decision. And in fact, if anything, they're getting more attention for strengthening them post the Stonewall decision. But it's that was how that balance came to be struck.
Okay. Next question. Can you recall if you had any direct conversation with a UCL student or worker who identify as transgender, non-binary, or genderqueer about UCL's membership of the Stonewall scheme and how it impacts those communities?
Yeah, so look, I think it's important to understand my role in this. And, I can do the chant, Michael Spence, don't be dense, Michael Spence, get off the fence, all of that kind of stuff. But I see my role. I didn't vote in the academic board decision. I see my role as being chairing these conversations and making sure that the conversations are conducted in a way that's fair, so that the different voices at the university are heard, and so that we arrive at a decision that is robust for the university. And in that context, it was the job of all the groups that you talked about in your last in the last question you read, Angel, to bring in the voices of our trans, non-binary and gendered, non-conforming, and indeed our LGBTQI communities, because there are many communities, into that conversation. So that was procedurally how I saw my function in this, rather than being the function of, as it were, canvassing opinions individually.
Cool. Excluding this specific topic, can you recall the last time you spoke with someone who identified within those groups about their experience of studying or working at UCL? And that's excluding, I guess, our meeting last time, because we, as much as we want to, we don't represent all of UCL students.
Yes, I can. I last time was probably shortly after the academic board decision, or maybe a couple of months before that. But yes, I mean, if the point is, do I need convincing that there is a real issue here with transphobia at UCL, but also more generally in the community, then the answer is no. You know, in my time working at universities, I've heard all the terrible stories about lecturers refusing to use people's names and things that people say, and ways in which trans students are marginalized. I don't need any convincing that, and one of the things that I find hard about this situation we're in is I really want our trans, non-binary and gender non-inclusive students to know that the university is for them, and many of them doubt that now that we're not members of Stonewall.
Yeah, just to bring back the topic onto academic freedom. This person asked, I shared academic board's concern about a scenario in which academic freedom is curtailed, but I'm also yet to be convinced that membership of the Diversity Champions program would have that effect. What evidence do you have of incident in which Stonewall has restricted the academic freedom of subscribing institutes?
So look, there's all sorts of, in the debates and the conversations around and all the rest of it, there are all sorts of anecdotal things, and you know, you can point to things like the guidelines on collecting data that essentially say you should collect data on gender and not sex, and all the rest of it. I mean, I don't. So, it was, but I think what swung the academic board decision was more the question: should we join a group, a lobbying group, that is saying no debate about things about which a large or a section of our academic community think there are legitimate questions to be asked? And so it was about, you know, free speech and academic freedom things. They're really about rules that prohibit things. They're much more often about chilling the conversation and having the whole university oriented towards getting a kite mark, part of which a kite mark issued by an organization that says no debate, that was thought to have a chilling effect. And you know, and I could reel out the anecdotes about you know, people referring to Stonewall in no platforming and all of the rest of it, but I'm not sure those anecdotes are helpful. I think the core thing is this issue about joining a lobbying organization that is not prepared to countenance debate of a kind that is central to the work of some of our academics.
Just to follow up, why was there no independent group set up to lay out arguments for and against rejoining Stonewall to the academic board, as was done with the IHRA vote?
So the IHRA vote was that group was established before my time and was established by the academic board itself. In this context, the academic board didn't feel that it needed such a mechanism, and in fact, it did have the paper from Professor Rosenell. Now, I mean, people have that paper, in my humble opinion, sets out as neutrally as it would be possible to set out the arguments on each side. And the topic sits squarely within her own area of academic expertise. So I think Academic Board felt that it had enough information upon which to make a decision.
Next question is, from a value standpoint, does UCL place academic freedom at the most paramount and thus above the protection of the most marginalized group within the community?
So I think it's a kind of, it's a false dichotomy. I don't think that you can have hierarchies of values like that. Does UCL prioritize truth over justice? Does UCL prioritize love over virtue? I think UCL is deeply committed to the protection of marginalized communities and deeply committed to academic freedom, and that any set of values have constantly and always to be referred to in every decision and to be held in tension in every decision. And they often are in tension. And in a sense, I say at risk of potentially irritating some, this decision is this question is a good example of it, because both sex and gender reassignment are protected characteristics in the equalities legislation. And we've got to work out what it means to be faithful to both our commitment to inclusion on the basis of sex and our inclusion on the basis of gender. And that's tough. One of the problems with the Stonewall decision is, it's a binary decision. You either join or you don't join. Whereas real life is more complicated than that and actually involves all the many decisions you have to make in order to make sure that people are included. And that's why I'm really keen that we get on with the hard and boring job. Well, not boring, important, but the hard yards job of asking about all our policies. Are these trans-inclusionary in some obvious way, exclusionary in some obvious way, or are they trans-exclusionary in some not obvious way that we wouldn't think about, but that our trans, non-binary and gender non-conforming staff and students experience as trans-exclusionary?
Yep, very good point. The next question is, can you explain your understanding of what the no debate policy actually comprises and indicate where in Stonewall's policy guideline it appears?
So it's a slogan that Stonewall use quite a bit. And I mean, they are committed to the notion that sex and gender are interchangeable. And the equalities legislation thinks that they are separate, and many of our researchers think that they are separate.
And why was the vote of the EDI committee neglected? And what will starting a new committee do besides introducing another vote to be ignored?
Yeah, so I really object to the framing of the question. The vote of the EDI committee was not neglected. If you have two bodies addressing their minds to different aspects of the same issue, and one says yes and the other says no, and it's a binary choice, then you've got to make a decision. but doesn't mean you're neglecting the decision one way or the other, but doesn't mean you're neglecting the advice that you don't take. And I mean, I think in this case, yeah, the UMC acted on the basis of the advice of the academic board, but it was, but it took very seriously the concerns of the EDI community about committee about transphobia at UCL, and therefore expressed its desire to really reinforce our protection for trans staff and students at UCL.
Can you expand on the point then? How do you see the new committee be working alongside EDI and academic board?
Yeah, sorry. EDI is a committee that has general responsibility across all of the different protected characteristics, but also diversity more generally at UCL. It's a general committee of the University Management Committee that meets as a management group and takes decisions and makes recommendations and whatever. The new implementation group is a task and finish group that will have particular focus on what we should be doing at the moment to make a difference for the experience of being at UCL of trans, non-binary and gender non-inclusive staff and students. So, the implementation group is the group that will oversee that work of really having a focus at the moment on trans staff and students, and will report into the EDI committee.
Can you talk a little bit about how the new implementation group will be made up of, like the percentage of students or staff, or how people will be put on this group?
Yeah, so I can't, and that sounds kind of pathetic. But I can't for a particular reason. I was keen that we just got out and set it up and got the work going. The advice we got, including from the EDI team in the university, was that given that people were a bit, given that people were annoyed about Stonewall, it would rub insult into injury to establish a group without first having extensively consulted about what the composition of the group should be and about the precise scope of its work. And so we are in the process of consulting about the composition of the group and the precise scope of its work, with the caveat that I'm very keen to get things done, and therefore with a sort of time limitation to that. And what we've undertaken to do is routinely in the week, the sort of weekly update on things going on at UCL, to update people on where we are in that process of constituting the implementation group.
Thank you for people who submitted those questions. And here's another one. You claimed that UCL's initial departure from Stonewall was due to funding constraints, and yet membership was £5,000 annually. How do you respond to this?
Yeah, I could answer this the easy way and say it were before my time, Gov. But my understanding is that it wasn't so much the £5,000 as the fact that actually submitting for the schemes is pretty labor intensive, and that there was, as it were, all hands were on deck to save the university during COVID, and in addition, that financial savings were being looked for everywhere, because the university really didn't know what situation it was going to be in. So that's my understanding of the basis upon which the decision was made there, that during that emergency time, things that could wait a year, were agreed to wait a year. And in fact, I think the LESG agreed to that at the time. I think there was consultation about that at the time. But as I say, the details are slightly hazy because it's before my time at the university.
Next two questions. The Stonewall isn't a regulatory board, so why was academic freedom cited as a reason for withdrawing? And would we consider leaving Athena Swan or Race Equality Charter if there was concerns about academic freedom?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. I think each of these has to be considered on its merits. I think Athena Swan is different in that it's a group that was set up for universities that has the particular university context in mind, and it is a charity with a particular purpose. Stonewall is a lobbying group that's keen to see the law changed in various ways. I think that makes the schemes different, but I have not heard anybody calling for our leaving either of those other groups. You can't. So that's a completely honest answer, right? I could say no, we're never going to leave any other group, but I would have, if we'd still been members of Stonewall, I would have said that about Stonewall a year ago. I think it's we are an organisation where an organisation that exists by debate, where in these complex questions, we're always trying to do the right thing. And I'm proud of the fact that because we're that kind of organisation, we were working in the trans rights space long before Stonewall. But similarly, we're an organisation that will continue to debate what the right thing is to do in any given situation as the years goes on, against our fundamental values. And equality and diversity and inclusion, they're fundamental values. And so too is academic freedom.
Could you expand a bit more on the non-regulatory nature of the Stonewall and the academic freedom argument?
Yeah, so it is. So non-regulatory is a really interesting concept here, right? Because it is non-regulatory in the sense that it can't stop you from operating. But you join a kite mark organization because you want to get the kite mark and you want to do what they're telling you to do. And so in that sense, it's kind of quasi-regulatory. And I think that was, it was the, as social scientists say, what gets measured gets done. And I think there was concern that the university's desire to make sure it did well in the Stonewall scheme might mean that it compromised the academic freedom of some of our staff and students.
So why does academic freedom not extend to eugenics, but does to the life of trans people and the rights up to their own identities?
So I don't kind of get the framing of the question. So the UCL eugenics inquiry was about whether we should continue to celebrate by naming the work of people who are involved in eugenics. And the answer to that is clearly no. We ought not to do it. And we decided not to do it. And moreover, we decided to repurpose funds that had been given in that name to better uses. And we would do we'd do the same thing again. That's a different, that in a sense, it didn't raise a question of academic freedom. And I can't see a parallel situation raising a question of academic freedom.
So I can give you a direct quote from the official UCL apology for the history and legacy of eugenics. And it says, "We operate in a climate of academic freedom, but we recognize that it is that the right to freedom of expression is also unfettered." So how do you think that's different from the Stonewall academic freedom issue?
So I agree that the right to academic freedom is not unfettered. It's not the right to say whatever you want. It has constraints, not least it has legal constraints, but they won't, for example, it doesn't protect hate speech. It wouldn't protect transphobic abuse. It wouldn't protect speech that is regulated by the Equalities Act. It wouldn't protect defamatory speech. It wouldn't protect, there's all kinds of speech that are not protected by academic freedom. But the work that was at issue here was work by serious social scientists about the difference between sex and gender, and whether there is a difference between sex and gender, and which there is in law, and whether that difference is important. And that's a serious academic question to discuss. So I can't imagine that a conception of academic freedom wouldn't protect that discussion. And that's not hate speech. It's not defamatory, and it's not speech barred by the equalities legislation, and it's not all sorts of other speech that we would not defend.
So the next question, are you going to acknowledge the existing extensive lobbying of gender critical feminists and women's liberation to secure signatures against rejoining Stonewall?
So I genuinely don't understand the question here. So I said at the beginning, a group of staff asked for a discussion in academic board of these issues, and that group of staff include many who would identify themselves as gender critical feminists. That's not lobbying. If 12 members of academic staff requisition it, you can have a meeting of the academic board. So it's not lobbying, it's a part of our constitutional arrangements.
Yeah, just a note that several questions submitted reference specific people, and we're not going to put those people out, but I hope that the response to this question covers that.
Yeah, and can I say something about that, which is some of the people who've been concerned about their academic freedom being compromised at UCL have been treated really badly. And many of them are women, many of them are lesbian women. And I think we all need to remember the duty to respect one another and to respect one another's right to hold different views about even quite difficult issues. Because if we can't talk about those things at the university, where can we talk about them?
We're quickly approaching the question why did UMC not ensure that a new process of supporting LGBTQ+ equality was already in place before the actual withdrawing of Stonewall?
So we have mechanisms for well-established mechanisms for supporting LGBTQ plus staff and students, and for education and campaigns and training and all the rest of it. And indeed, there's trans training that goes on across the university and all the rest of it. I don't think it was that this conversation made us think, trans and non-binary and gender non-inclusive people are important and their rights need to be protected and they need to be included. Who would have known that? I think this whole experience, not least through the work of the EDI committee and the EDI team, threw a spotlight on the fact that there were issues of transphobia at UCL, and that it was worth us paying particular attention at this particular historic moment to the rights of that group of staff and students in particular. And so it was more about reinforcing what we were already doing and having a kind of push on work in that area, rather than all of a sudden discovering that it was an issue.
So we're quickly approaching to the end of the session. I think we'll have to wrap up with one final question, if that's okay.
Sure.
Why were trans voices not actively sought by academic board to inform the UMC decisions?
So it's been suggested that no trans identify or no gender non-conforming staff spoke during the debate. I don't know if that's true, but you're right. Academic board did not say, let's take this away and talk to trans staff and students. I think it was because they felt that they had the information that they needed on which to make a decision. But people may disagree with that. But that is within the decision of academic board. I know people have talked about academic board as unrepresentative and all the rest of it. It's less unrepresentative than has sometimes been made out, but it also has a constitutional function in the statutes of the university.
I think that should be all the questions. Thank you so much for submitting those questions today, everyone, and thank you for engaging with the topic. We tried our best to cover as much as possible with a broad range of questions. And thank you, Dr. Spence, for being so open. And I hope this should be the beginning of an ongoing conversation between the provost and the student bodies at UCL. And we're here to improve people's lives, trans students, LGBT students, etc. And do you have any closing remarks?
So the first thing is I'd like to thank you, Angel, for putting this event together and for giving the people the opportunity to ask questions and me the opportunity to address them. I mean, doubtless, many people will both find my answers in one way or another unsatisfactory, and it's not implausible that there are some people who are more irritated because of things I've said today than before. One thing I hope people would believe is that I personally am genuinely committed to seeing us make a difference in this area, and genuinely committed to making sure that UCL is a place where everybody can be themselves and everybody can be heard, and where everybody can feel included. And sometimes getting that right is not straightforward, but I think it's but it's important to me, for what that's worth, for people to know that it's my goal.
Thank you so much. And yeah, February is LGBT History Month, and obviously as an LGBTQ officer, I represent the UCL LGBT network, and we had a lot of events come for LGBT History Month, but doesn't mean when February is coming to an end, it doesn't mean that our events are also coming to an end. We have all year round different kind of events suiting for all sorts of people. So if you are interested, you can follow us on UCL LGBT on Facebook and Instagram.
That'd be great. And I'm also hosting an event early in March, which will be in March, for which it will be advertised soon. I know that I've missed February, but like you, I don't think these issues have a month.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming, and thank you for taking time off your busy schedule to talk to us.
Thank you.
Thank you.